Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 707 for June 17th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
I like to say it's like the roller derby of cocktail competitions because it's fast, it's hard, it's fun, it's fierce, it's all women, and it's intense.
Lynette Marrero and Ivy Mix founded the Speed Rack competition in 2012 as a way to showcase women bartenders just as the cocktail craze was hitting full steam. Over the years, Speed Rack has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for breast cancer research, and next month, they'll stage the first Speed Rack competition in Australia. I'll talk with Lynette Marrero later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. And we'll also check in with Lynn House on the finals of Heaven Hill's 2018 Bartender of the Year competition, which is getting underway this weekend in Sea Island, Georgia. That's coming up later, along with the calendar of events, your voice, behind the label, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all coming up on this episode of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's start off with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And there's another front for American whiskey makers to deal with in the trade war. China announced on Saturday that it will include bourbon and other American whiskeys on its new list of U.S. exports to be hit with a 25% tariff starting on July 6th. That comes after the U.S. announced a new set of tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese imports, primarily in the technology arena. China's response largely targets the Farm Belt, with new tariffs on grain, soybeans, beef, and pork, along with U.S. automobiles and whiskey. China is not among the major export markets for American whiskeys, but is one of the countries where the Distilled Spirits Council has conducted promotions in recent years aimed at boosting whiskey exports. The tariffs are likely to put American whiskeys at a price disadvantage to Scotch whiskey and other whiskeys exported to China. We'll have more on this story next time around. Kentucky's Castle and Key Distillery will not have its first whiskeys out for a while yet, but the distillery's owners appear to have successfully fought off a legal challenge following their purchase of the abandoned Old Taylor Distillery and renovating the site. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati has upheld a lower court ruling that Castle and Key founders Will Arvin and Wesley Murray did not infringe on Sazerac's trademarks for Old Taylor and Colonel E.H. Taylor in promoting the distillery's restoration. The three-judge panel ruled that Arvin and Murray were within their rights to use the Old Taylor Distillery name in a descriptive and geographic manner in connection with the site of their distillery, especially since they have yet to release any whiskeys and will use the Castle and Key brand name when they do. Sazerac executives declined to comment on the ruling. Arvin and Murray have not been available for interviews. In another case involving potentially confusing whiskey names, the European Court of Justice has suggested that Germany's Glenbuchenbach whiskey might just be infringing on Scotch whiskey's geographical designations. The court referred a Scotch Whisky Association complaint back to a German court in Hamburg for review. Waldhorn Distillery in Swabia makes Glenbuchenbach and is located in the Buchenbach Valley. Its whiskey is labeled as Swabian single malt and made in Germany. The SWA routinely goes after whiskey companies outside of Scotland who use the word Glen in their branding on the grounds that it could confuse consumers into thinking they were buying a Scotch whiskey. Canada's Supreme Court rejected that idea several years ago in the Glenbretton case, but in this case, the Luxembourg-based appeals court said the German court should consider whether the average European consumer would be confused. No word on when the German court will issue another ruling. There's no confusion between Glen and Vienne, though. Vienne, spelled H-V-E-N, is a Swedish island distillery that's celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, and its whiskey is now available in the U.S. for the first time. The distillery's Marcus Christensen was pouring Vienne's debut U.S. release at this week's New York Independent Spirits Expo.
We're just in the Strait of Öresund between Sweden and Denmark, so we have about half an hour from Copenhagen. So we're really close to both Sweden and Denmark, so we have two home markets. But it's not an isolated island. It's easy to go there, but it's a small one.
Tell me about the history of the distillery.
It's actually pretty fun because we are a family-owned company. And we started out as a hotel and conference facility at the start. And then we have the husband in the family, our master distiller, Henrik. He is a chemist from the start and loves whiskey and worked as a consultant for a lot of distilleries before. And of course, he wanted to do a whiskey. Who wasn't? Who wouldn't want to do that? So we started up with a distillery in 2008, so we've been up and running for about 10 years right now. And now we're starting to get more and more business in the U.S., and that's what we're looking for right now.
Your whiskeys have been available all over Europe, but this is the first time they've been sold in the U.S., right?
Yeah, we've been in the U.S. for about not even a year, but we're starting to get there. So this is the first thing we do, the first event we do in New York, actually. So it's really fun. We've done a couple of things in Las Vegas before, but this is the first time.
Tell me about the whiskeys. What are you making these days? I know it's all single malt, but there's some varieties here, right?
Yeah, we do different varieties. We do unpeated, heavily peated, and medium peated whiskeys. But the thing that we sell in the US is our Tycho Star, and that's a medium peated single malt whiskey. More of, we want to bring more of the licorice notes, the campfire, not the tarry, really dry notes. We want to have the sweetness in it also. So that is what we're working with in the US. And then in Europe we do a different series that we call the 7 Stars, where we follow the 7 stars of the plow or the Big Dipper. It's an annual release. We do about 3,000-4,000 bottles a year. But for the US it's only the Tycho Star right now, but you know, we're in whiskey terms, we're a young distillery. We're just 10 years old. So I would say that for the U.S. market, it will come a lot of more products, but you know, it's whiskey. It takes time.
Now, we've had Swedish whiskeys in the States before. We've had Danish whiskeys in the States to a certain extent that didn't go as well, I think, as the distillers and the importers had liked for a number of reasons. What are those drawbacks, and what did you learn from those whiskeys that will make this different?
Actually, to be honest, we don't look at what other people do, we look at what we do. The other distilleries, actually I don't know what they did that didn't work, but we have our plan settled, so we're going for that, and then hopefully it works better. But you know, it's the Swedish whiskey scene is coming up right now. We have about 12 different distilleries up and running, so hopefully everyone will just put their game together and you know, push up the level of the products a little bit, and then we can be a dot on the whiskey map, like Japanese whiskeys or Indian whiskeys.
Although for you to be a stop on a Swedish whiskey trail is going to require a ferry boat, right?
Yeah, but you know, it's easy to get on a boat. The hard part is to go to Europe first. That's the long flight.
I'll have my tasting notes for Vienne's Tycho's Star later on. And by the way, the whiskey gets its name from the island's most notable native, the astronomer Tycho Brahe. Also out of Scandinavia, last fall we had an update on Kiro Distillery's release of its first Finnish rye whiskey in Europe. Kiro is now entering the U.S. market, but it'll be a while yet before Kiro's whiskeys get here. Co-founders Kalle Valkonen and Juni Riddala were pouring Kiro's gin at Bar Convent, Brooklyn this week.
It has been like a 2 years process to find the right guys to start with. And we even sent out one of the founders to US to run the market. So we have here Joni Ritola, one of the founders as well.
So tell me about the process of getting into the market. What was it like trying to work everything out?
Well, I think give the word out to Joni because he's been doing most of that job. I concentrate on distilling and making the great products.
Joni, what was it like trying to get into the U.S. market?
I think the key thing coming here is to get the distribution right. And I think we were working for the distribution for all that 2 years to finally get it right. And right now we will start from Midwest, from Illinois. And we've got a great distributor there called Breakthrough Beverages, supported by myself and sales and marketing arm called Thoroughbred.
Now, you brought in both the gin and the rye, right?
We only bought now the gin. That's also rye-based gin, but we only brought that at the moment because the rye availability will be better at the end of 2019. So we'll bring that about that time.
So, Callie, you guys cranking out enough rye to get this here a year from now?
I don't think we are ever making enough rye whiskey because we think there will be a huge demand on this single malt rye and this big, bold, spicy character that we can get out of the Nordic rye. So we are trying to expand the rye production all the time. So this year we're going to be producing 85,000 liters whiskey to mature, but that will only come out in 3 to 4 years.
So next year, when you bring the rye over, what will it'll be what, a 3-year-old at that point?
It will be a 3-year-old, but we are using a lot of new American oak, so we get the nice vanilla character to our finished bold spicy rye quite good in that time, and it will be something different than the rye we've been used to drink.
You'll find my tasting notes for Akiro's debut rye whiskey at whiskycast.com. And while we're catching up on recent stories, the last time we heard from Uncle Nearest whiskey founder Fawn Weaver back in January, she had just acquired a horse farm in Tennessee to become the home of the Nearest Green Distillery. It's named for Nathan Nearest Green, the former slave who became the first distiller for Jack Daniels after the end of the Civil War. And Fawn's project is moving along quickly.
It is going incredible. There's so much excitement in that area that we ended up having the local newspaper come out and peek through the windows and take pictures, and it ended up on the front page of the newspaper and with a little note that said, "We looked inside, it looks like it's almost ready." And so there's a lot of excitement around it. We will open up the visitor center next month. We'll open up our processing plant soon as we get our DSP, so I'm assuming somewhere around August. And then we'll just keep opening up building after building. It already has 10 buildings that we're going to utilize, that we're just re-outfitting before we end up adding any additional buildings. So we're moving at a pretty good pace.
Yeah. You're in 42 states now?
We are now, at the end of this month, we'll be in 30. We'll be in 42 by the end of the year. I don't count the online in terms of just physically where we are. We'll be in 42, and then we're already in London, and we're heading into Japan.
Better than you ever expected, isn't it?
Beyond. Absolutely beyond. But it's exciting. We launched in Chicago last week, and there were about 400 of Chicago's top dogs in, everyone from police chief and the president of the Illinois Senate and everyone coming out and just essentially saying, we are going to raise a glass to this man whose story was forgotten, but it's our responsibility to make sure it's not forgotten again. And there, I think we're going to do it. I think long after any of us that are standing here are gone, I believe the brand will live on, and that's what we set out to do.
Sales of Uncle Nearest whiskey support the Nearest Green Foundation, which provides college scholarships for Nathan Green's descendants. Chivas Brothers is coming out with a new 28-year-old edition of its Royal Salute blended scotch. The Kew Palace edition is this year's release in the Royal Salute Flask collection of limited edition releases, and part of the sales will benefit Historic Royal Palaces, which operates the Kew Palace in London. It's a collaboration between Chivas Brothers blending director Sandy Hislop and perfumer Barnabé Filion, and will be available at select whiskey shops worldwide for around $800 a bottle. One quick executive suite update. Diageo North America President Deirdre Malin has been elected chair of the Distilled Spirits Council's Board of Directors. She takes over for Moet Hennessy CEO Jim Clerkin after his 2 years in the post. The council's board has also named Clarkson Hine of Beam Suntory to serve as the interim president and CEO. As we reported last month, current president and CEO Craig Nass is stepping down to return to his public policy firm. A search is underway for a permanent successor. And finally, police in Arkansas are investigating the cause of a crash between two 18-wheelers on Interstate 40 Thursday. One of the trucks was hauling a load of Fireball whiskey, and the crash sent cases and bottles of whiskey spilling all over the highway. There were minor injuries reported. Part of the highway was closed for several hours to clean up the mess. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Heading out on a road trip this summer? Take a bit of Highland Park along with you for the drive. Not the whiskey, of course, but take Highland Park's specially curated playlists on Spotify. They'll help you cruise like a Viking and save the whiskey for the end of the road. Check out the whole Highland Park lineup at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts is hosting a Taste of Bourbon History this coming Thursday night, June 21st. It features the James Thompson and Brother Final Reserve bourbons, along with some vintage bourbons from the 1950s and 1960s, provided by Skinner's Auctions. Woodford Reserve Distillery kicks off a new Best of Kentucky Summer Dinner Series, June 23rd in Versailles, Kentucky. The Erin Malton Music Festival is June 29th through July 1st in La Cranza, Scotland, and Sweden's Box Distillery will hold its annual whiskey festival at what will be known from now on as High Coast Distillery, June 30th and 31st in Adalen, Sweden. McTeers has its next whiskey auction July 6th in Glasgow, Scotland. The Proof Washington Distillers Festival is July 7th in Seattle. The Nav Center in Cornwall, Ontario hosts Beer, Bourbon, Blues, and Barbecue on July 14th, and Tales of the Cocktail takes over New Orleans from July 17th through the 22nd. Right now, we have 215 different events on the searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. There's bound to be at least one event near you.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. Aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up. Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume, imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. It's always good when there's a way to combine the passion for whiskey and other adult beverages with a way to help raise money and awareness for good causes. Back in 2012, New York City bartenders Ivy Mix and Lynette Marrero came up with the idea to do just that, while putting a much-needed spotlight on talented women working behind the bar at the same time. They created the Speed Rack bartending competition, and it's grown to become a nationwide challenge with 8 regional events around the U.S., leading up to the finals. There's also Speed Rack Canada for women in the Canadian cocktail industry. And when I caught up with Lynette Marrero the other day at Bar Convent, Brooklyn, she was practically floating, because next month, Speed Rack expands to Australia for the first time.
I am so excited. Ivy and I have been wanting to go to Australia for years. They've always been a bar scene that really understands the Speed Rack culture. They've also been a community that's always had some really great initiatives for breast cancer. So it was always the perfect marriage. It just took a long time because it's so far away. But we're really excited. We at Tales of the Cocktail last year, one of the local people in the community, this awesome guy named Quinn, was like, I want to bring it, what do we need to do? So we've been working for the last almost year to bring it to Australia. We have 5 different regionals coming up in 2 weeks in Brisbane, Perth, Sydney, and Melbourne. And we're going to be really stoked to see the female talent that comes out of that. And then the nationals are going to be in Sydney on July 27th. And it's going to be amazing. We're really excited.
Let's explain what Speed Rack is for those who aren't aware of it.
Absolutely. So Speed Rack is an all-women's bartending competition that raises money for breast cancer research. It's a platform. What we do is we focus on classic cocktails, and we do it in 4 drink rounds. So I like to say it's like the roller derby of cocktail competitions, because it's fast, it's hard, it's fun, it's fierce, it's all women, and it's intense. And we have 4 judges. So we kind of think of it like you're working a Saturday night in the service bar, and like your 4 cocktail heroes walk in the door and sit right in your station, and you have to make drinks for them and the entire house. So it's making those drinks very quickly, but making sure that they're the best 4 drinks that you've made.
And obviously the cause is a very important one.
Absolutely. My mother-in-law is a survivor of breast cancer. What we realized when we started Speed Rack was that we wanted to obviously promote women, and then we thought about how can we also give back to the greater community. And we have been able, through the last 7 years with the money we've raised, help and support different charities that tackle the problem from many places, from research to community-run support to screenings to. So we're really helping, and a few of the companies that we've been working with have even been able to double their efforts and become 24-hour hotlines for people who find out that they're diagnosed with breast cancer. So it's been really great to see the work, and that this community has all donated to be able to have an effect outside the world.
It also really emphasizes the role of women in bartending at a time when we have a lot of controversy over that, over the whole Me Too movement and the way women have been treated in the hospitality industry. This is one of the few places where women can really sort of stand out from the crowd, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, and Speed Rack, we realized, for something to run 7 years and be successful, obviously we have been creating a space for these kinds of conversations. We've built a community of women who are now globally communicating with each other and have that support. And last year we started the Sisterhood Project with Del Maguey and Forge Gin, where at each Speed Rack we do some sort of conversation uniting all the women to talk about things that are even as simple as, finances. As bartenders and people who have income that's not necessarily as consistent, how do you manage that on a yearly basis? What can we give the tools for these women to succeed and move on, to talk about, mental health and wellness and how that affects it, and when things that are happening in our community, like what's going on with the Me Too movement and unpacking a lot of that trauma, we have a safe space to really try to talk about it with everyone, and we invite men to join that conversation as well, because only together can we improve and make this, as a community come together and set guidelines that we all agree by to improve the situation.
And it's also become a mentoring place as well for those of you who have been in the industry for a while to help women who are just getting started, right?
Absolutely. It's the greatest joy to give back. Ivy and I have had a lot of success and have been very fortunate with our careers, and to be able to give a platform that we're able to take these women with us. Women get recruited constantly from Speed Rack for different jobs, and there's so many bartenders, so many things going on. If you can give that one platform, that one person to stand up there and say, look at me, hire me, I'm fierce, I'm fearless, and that's what's really great to see.
When does the U.S. round start, the next one?
We will start up again in October of 2018. We always like to kind of start right around National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and then we'll go through May. And this year we did our national finals for the first time in Chicago at the Drink Chicago Style Festival, which is a great new festival that really tackles a lot of these conversations and issues about intersectionality and sustainability and thinking looking at the hospitality industry from a different light. So that was a really successful thing, and we're excited to do it again. So.
I don't think I've ever asked you this question. Where the hell did the name Speed Rack come from?
So Speed Rack is the list. It's the bottles that are in front of you in your station. You can call that a rail or the well, but it's also called a Speed Rack. So it's the double entendre, obviously, picking up bottles from there, but also when a woman's shaking fast, it's a Speed Rack, for lack of a better word, bringing it to the the obvious double entendre.
politically incorrect, but for a good cause.
That's right. Well, it's playful, and I think that's also sometimes we can be a little playful with the things that we do as well.
New York City's Haley Traub, who splits her time between Dutch Kills in Queens and Fresh Kills in Brooklyn, took the 2018 title last month in Chicago. And by the way, Laura Newman of Queens Park in Birmingham, Alabama, is also a Speed Rack veteran. Earlier this month, she became the first woman to win the U.S. round of World Class, the bartending competition sponsored by Diageo and the U.S. Bartenders Guild. She'll go on to the Global World Class Finals to be held in Berlin, Germany this October. Right now, the 8 regional winners in Heaven Hill's 2018 Bartender of the Year competition are gathered at The Lodge in Sea Island, Georgia, for the finals. They'll be tasked with coming up with a unique cocktail, but it's more than just that. Heaven Hill National Brand Educator Lynn House is one of the 3 judges.
Last year, what we had them do, our finals were actually in Puerto Rico, and we really had them embrace the culture of Puerto Rico. So they got a chance to go out, work with a chef, look at the gardens, learn all about Puerto Rican culture, and then they were required to make a cocktail. We had it at the St. Regis Bahia in Puerto Rico to make a cocktail that essentially embraced the local ingredients and the culture of Puerto Rico. We also challenged them on their knowledge of classics was part of the competition, and, just some other factors, their knowledge of Heaven Hill, menu writing, how they cost out the menu. So it's not just making a cocktail. It's really looking at a person, their hospitality, their knowledge, their wealth, their creativity, speed, efficiency. All of that factors into our kind of requirements for who we think are the top bartenders in this country.
The first prize, $15,000. We'll have the results next time around. And that's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distiller's Edition, and the throwback 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and let's start off with a couple of whiskeys we mentioned during the news. I finally got to try the Uncle Nearest 1856 Tennessee whiskey this week. It comes from an undisclosed Tennessee distillery and then uses the sugar maple charcoal filtering process said to have been created by Nathan Nearest Green. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and that extra strength adds to the flavor. The nose has a hint of maple, along with honey, brown sugar, molasses, muted spices, and hints of oak and old leather. The taste is nice and spicy, with black pepper on top of honey and maple notes, with just a hint of oak. And the finish is long with lingering spices and honey sweetness. I'm scoring the Uncle Nearest 1856 Tennessee whiskey a 90. Tycho's Star from Sweden's Vienne Distillery is bottled at 41.8% ABV and is Vienne's medium peated single malt. The nose has notes of wood smoke, pears, apple pie, and hints of ginger root and sea salt. The taste has wood smoke, clove, cardamom, and a subtle fruitiness with hints of ginger and apple pie for a nice balance and complexity. The finish is long but subtle with hints of smoke, dried fruits, and soft spices. I'm scoring Vienne's Tycho's Star Swedish Single Malt a 90. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, who is proud to announce a new grain-to-glass project where proprietary seed and unique mash bills re-examine the variables that go into making whiskey. See more at heavenhilldistillery.com/blog. Think wisely, drink wisely. I received a sample the other day of the 2018 French Oak Single Malt from Balcones Distillery in Texas. Fur Oak, as they like to call it, was matured for 36 months in first fill French oak barrels and bottled at 59.9% ABV. The nose is full of figs, plums, and Christmas cake with muted spices, a mild touch of oak tannins, and just a hint of brandy. The taste is intense both in spiciness and fruitiness, with clove, allspice, plums, raisins, a hint of dates, and a slight touch of oak tannins. The finish is long, slightly astringent, and fruity, with just a hint of spice. I'm scoring the 2018 Balcones French Oak Single Malt Froke a 91. And finally, let's look at the new Port Charlotte 10-year-old Islay Single Malt from Bruichladdich. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has a great peatiness with hints of creosote and iodine, along with heather, honey, and just a touch of oak. The taste is thick, chewy, smoky, and spicy all at the same time. There's good peatiness and a slightly medicinal touch, white pepper, allspice, honey, oak, and just a hint of sea salt. The finish is medium length and smoky with subtle hints of spice, and I've got to admit, I like this one. I'm scoring the Port Charlotte 10-year-old a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'm adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of tasting notes for more than 2,200 different whiskeys from around the world at WhiskyCast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. It's been a couple of months since we started producing 2 episodes of WhiskyCast each week, and we finally received a complaint this week. Dirk Rabinski sent this tongue-in-cheek tweet the other day. I can't keep up with all the WhiskyCast episodes that flood my podcast catcher, so unfortunately I have to skip most of them. And I'm not willing to make my commute even longer. Dirk, we understand your dilemma. Just take a long road trip this summer and use the time to get caught up. At Newbie, N-E-U-B-I-E-E on Twitter, tweeted a question from Ontario recently asking about the various Bunnahabhain single malts. He first tweeted, I am a huge fan of Bunnahabhain 18-year. I know the 18-year is definitely worth the price over the 12-year, which is also good. In your opinion, is the 25-year worth the price difference for someone without unlimited resources? At the time, I responded that it's been a while since I've tasted the Bunnahabhain 25, and I'd really need to try it again before I could make a fair comparison. Well, at Newbie tweeted again this week, OMG, has it really gone up that much? A year or two I saw it for $500 USD. Just looked and it's around $800. That's almost $1,100 Canadian. My wife would lose her mind on me, LOL. No comment. Clint Sample, at SnapsGuy on Twitter, needs our help with his trip this week. I'll be in Rio de Janeiro this week. Does anyone know of anything in particular worth looking for in the duty-free shop? Brazil isn't typically thought of when talking about whiskey, but I thought I'd ask. Well, Clint, I have not flown through Rio, so it's hard to give specifics, but the duty-free shop at Rio's airport is run by Dufry, which is the largest operator of travel retail stores worldwide, and runs the World of Whiskies shops at many of the UK airports, so they do have connections to get some good whiskeys. I took a look at their website, and they do appear to have most of the usual whiskeys you'd expect to find, and most of the prices are about what you'd expect to pay in the U.S. at retail, though. There were a couple of things that did stand out. The duty-free in Rio is offering 12-bottle case discounts on a variety of blended scotches. Now, that may sound attractive, but keep in mind that you might have some issues with customs at the other end, depending on where you live and what your home country's limits are. In the U.S., you have to pay duty on anything more than 1 liter of alcohol that you bring in from a trip overseas. Most of the time, U.S. Customs will let you slide if you're a little over that limit, but I suspect someone trying to carry a case of duty-free Scotch whiskey through customs will get a little more attention. The other thing that stood out, Rio's duty-free shop has really marked down its stock of the Highland Park travel retail whiskeys. Svein and Einar are selling now for around $50 each, while Harold has been marked down to around $70. Those are just about the lowest prices I've ever seen for those three whiskeys anywhere. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com or track us down on social media like Clint did. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Behind the label is our inside look at some of the science, history, and other things that make whiskey unique. We've mentioned many times over the years that Irish whiskey is unique in that it can be made in two countries. Of course, that's the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom. And as we reported the other day, the British government has committed to protecting that status after Brexit. But when do whiskey companies take a whiskey produced in one country and sell it as whiskey from another country? You might think that would be misleading and perhaps even illegal. Now, we're not talking about cases where a whiskey company takes whiskey from one country and blends it with whiskey or spirit from the destination country and discloses that fact on its labels. It happens with a number of whiskeys in India, and since we were just talking about Brazil, Pernod Ricard sells the Natu Nobilis brand there. It takes blended whiskey exported from Scotland and blends it with locally produced spirit and is upfront about that. However, the practice appears to be more widespread in Japan, where we have been talking about whiskey shortages for several years. There's nothing in Japanese law to prevent someone from importing bulk whiskeys into Japan and blending them there, then labeling the final product as a so-called Japanese whiskey. Of course, both of Japan's largest whiskey makers do own distilleries in Scotland. Suntory owns Laphroaig, Bowmore, Glengarry, Ardmore, and Auchentoshan distilleries, while Nika's parent company owns the Ben Nevis distillery. And it's common knowledge in Scotland that a lot of the Ben Nevis output does go to Japan. The one legal block to that, the UK's Scotch Whisky Law of 2009, banned the export of single malt Scotch whiskies outside of Scotland in anything other than a bottle for retail sale. It's only legal to export blended whiskies in bulk outside of Scotland, even to England. But Japan does not have any legal requirement on how much of a blended whiskey must be distilled in Japan for it to be called a Japanese whiskey. In fact, it doesn't even define a standard for whiskey. And there are some entrepreneurs who have driven a truck through that loophole by taking whiskeys from other countries to Japan and blending them, then selling the final product as a Japanese whiskey. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, the latest whiskey news, events, cocktail recipes, and much more, including a complete archive of past episodes. If you haven't done it already, please consider leaving a review or rating for WhiskyCast wherever you get your podcasts from, whether it's Apple Podcasts or another app. Those ratings are used to determine search results that help other whiskey lovers discover the show when they're looking for new podcasts. Our cask strength conversation continues all week long online. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.